All right, I'm pleased to be here. I'm really thrilled to be back at SVA. Of course, this is where I got my MFA, early 90s. I did not take up photography till I was in my mid-20s. All right. I went to college and got an undergraduate degree in business and spent the first decade or so of my professional career as an accountant, working in several unfulfilling jobs. So around, mid-80s, and I was about my mid-20s, started looking for some outlet for just something that I enjoyed doing, and stumbled upon photography. There's certainly like fortuitous events that sort of occur in your life, and you don't realize it sometimes till later on. But one of them is that I had received a camera as a gift, and while I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to take a course in photography to actually learn how it worked, I saw this film at a film festival in LA. And it was a film made by, I think the filmmaker's name was Carol Parrott Blue, and the film was about Roy DeCarava, who's a legendary New York photographer, passed away, I think, a couple of years ago. And it really struck me, really made an impression on me. And I mean, I think, okay, well, I definitely want to go take a course in photography. So I took a couple of courses, one at a high school and another one at UCLA. And my instructor at UCLA, extension course, I asked her if she was aware of Roy DeCarava. And she not only was aware of him, she had actually met him and had invited him out to speak in LA at an organization that she was a member of. Now, at that time, I didn't realize how unusual that was, all right? And later on found out there were very few, like, white photographers who had ever heard of Roy DeCarava. So the fact that she had not only heard of him and was aware of his work, but had actually met him and could speak about some personal contact with him was really unusual. And so she made me aware of a monograph he had with Friends of Photography. And so I went out to this bookstore in Santa Monica, California, and bought this book. And really just, fell in love with it, absorbed it backwards and forwards and upside down, however. And, from that book and also from a few other photographers who I discovered by this same bookstore, like Andre Cortege and Robert Frank, an LA photographer named Max Yavino. I really kind of started my education in photography, And so after about 6 years, well, let me just, some of the work that I was doing in LA was street photography, walking around the neighborhoods of South Central LA. And then I had another instructor that said, well, you should photograph something that you're passionate about, irrespective of whether or not you would you'd be around it, whether you're photographing it or not. And so immediately what came to mind was jazz. I've been a long time fan of jazz music. And so I started taking my camera to these clubs and photographing these musicians. No special access. I would just get there early and get a table up front and photograph. And certainly the work of Roy DeCarava was an inspiration to me in this regard. He photographed some of the greatest pictures of jazz musicians are by Roy DeCarava. There were some other photographs that photographers who I was aware of who had photographed jazz, like Herman Leonard, William Claxton, some of the Camoinge group like Buford Smith, Danny Dawson, of course, right here, sitting up front. So their works inspired me in what I was doing. And these photographs gave me the opportunity to sit in one spot and really intensely look at something, all right, as opposed to, say, walking around the streets. And I was able to think about framing things. It made me think about timing. We can go back to the other one. Because these clubs were so dark, it was hard, to get a still image of something. So I really had to pick out a time or a split second when the musician was still right? So it made me become much more aware of timing, and then sometimes I would go in the other direction completely and slow down the shutter speed and get these blurred effects. All right, so after about 6 years photographing in LA, I decided I wanted an actual formal education to some degree. And that's when I decided to move to New York and got accepted to the School of Visual Arts, to the MFA program. So SVA was just one part of my education, right? The other major part was just being in a place where there's so much photography on display all the time. I mean, in LA in the early 80s, you could find maybe 3 or 4 photography shows a month. You were doing pretty good, all right? You had one gallery that specialized in photography. Later on in the late 80s, you had another one. And if you could find a couple of more, that was really, you'd done your job. So, so to come to New York and find in any given month over 100 different displays of photography was just like overwhelming. So that, I mean, just spend all my time, or as much time as I could, in galleries, museums, absorbing as much as I could. Another educational resource was the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I interned there under Deborah Willis, a legendary historian on African American photography. And being there at the Schomburg and being able to go dig into their archives and come up with all this 19th century material, early 20th century material was an education in and of itself. And then also around 1991, I started working at Magnum Photos, the famous photojournalistic collective. And I just worked in the office there. I wasn't photographing for Magnum. But that was a great resource in the sense that I could just pull off the shelf these notebooks of contact sheets. Cartier-Bresson, Gilles Perez, Koudelka, and just study these contact sheets. And that in and of itself was an education. So all these different things, along with SVA, were educational for me. The project I undertook for my thesis, MFA thesis, was I entitled it Kinship. And I decided I wanted to photograph not only my family, but African American families in general. There's a lot at that time being written and spoken about in terms of the dysfunction of the African American family, disintegration of the African American family. And I knew it to be much more complex than that. And so I wanted to photograph things from my more intimate point of view. And I photographed my immediate family out in LA, as well as my extended family down in New Orleans. Both of my parents were from New Orleans, and my mom in particular had 8 brothers and sisters. So I had lots of cousins that lived down there, and they had their own children. So I hadn't been to New Orleans in about 15 years when I went back down in 1991. So this gave me a great opportunity to reconnect with my family down there. And so in these images, I was trying to capture just some of the things that go on in any household, between parents and children, the sort of boisterous nature of family life. Who remembers Captain Kangaroo? This series is when I first started working extensively with flash. And so I learned how to bounce it off the ceiling or some other surface to give a more naturalistic look, and how to mix the flashlight with the ambient light. Right? And also started working with wider angle lenses. Right? I started using the flash because I wanted to get more detail in the images. There were certain things I knew I wanted to freeze in terms of motion and to get more depth of field. So the flash enabled me to do that along with the wider angled lens. And again, I wanted to capture some sort of quiet, mundane, you might call, moments of everyday life. Went out and photographed. This is my friend from childhood. You know, I've known him since I was about 10 years old, but he lives out in Tacoma, Washington now with his family. I was concerned with gesture in a lot of these images, gesture and expression. Facial expressions as well. Yeah, most of these are in New Orleans. Some are in LA, but most of them are in New Orleans. I also had a cousin that moved to Setauket, New York, which was great. She was going to graduate school there, she and her husband. And so I used to go out to Long Island every other weekend and photograph them as well. Yes, I was trying to capture, again, some of just the boisterousness, but also some of the humor, the tragedy, you know, I mean, of being a 3-year-old and not getting your way. And again, gesture is an important aspect of some of the things I was trying to capture in these. And then family events, you know, as we call them, rituals, like wedding receptions, and again, in New Orleans, there's a whole like ritualistic thing that goes on with handkerchiefs and umbrellas. All right, so trying to capture these and these those things in these images as well. This is the funeral of my grandfather and 2 of my cousins. Jaime and I were talking about some of my jazz photographs and how some of these clubs in Harlem are no longer around. Well, the other thing I noticed in a lot of these photographs, after you've been doing it for a while, and particularly you're photographing people you know, is how many people you come across are now no longer around. So my cousin on the left here has passed away since. But I just kept being struck by that as I was going through and compiling these images, how many people I'd photographed were no longer with us. This is another cousin of mine that passed away from AIDS in '93. All right, so that was photographed primarily outside of New York, those images. I wanted to photograph, I did take lots of photographs in New York. I took lots of street photographs as well. I took lots of photographs in the subway. That was another project of mine. All right. But I got back to jazz around 1994. And again, it's sort of just a fortuitous event. I sat next to some woman at a concert, and she told me about this little club up on 157th Street in Broadway called the Metro Bar, where musicians would get together and jam on Monday nights. And she said, yeah, you know, it's just one, there's no cover charge. You just go up there, and these guys are, you know, a lot of them are older, but they're really good. And so one day I finally got around to it and went up there. And this is what the Metro Bar looked like. And the thing that struck me immediately was how communal the atmosphere was. You know, the jazz clubs I had gone to in LA, and then when I got to New York, I would go down Greenwich Village and go to all those jazz clubs as well. There was this distinct barrier between musician and audience. You know, musicians came, they played for the audience, and there was very little interaction between the two. This was much more of a communal atmosphere. I mean, most of the people in there sitting in this bar were musicians themselves, and so they would get up and sit in with the band, and there was this continuous flow back and forth from, you know, I won't even call it a bandstand. There is no bandstand. They're just standing in a certain corner of the room, back from the bar up into the where the musicians were playing, and so that really, you know, I really was enthused by that, as well as by the music. Again, a lot of these guys have been around for a long time, and you know, gigging for around New York. Weren't particularly famous, but they were excellent musicians. So I started off photographing primarily, again, the musicians. I had a little more freedom to move around in these places. But I met a woman there named Berta Alloway. And she told me about the jam sessions that she put together at another place called St. Nick's Pub on Monday nights. And she invited me to come down and take a look at what was going on there. So I did, and that was really, I think I described it in my book as the Metro Bar being sort of like an outdoor barbecue, whereas St. Nick's Pub was like an all-out party. So it was just this great, like, kinetic atmosphere happening in there. And again, because of this communal thing between the musicians and the audience and this free-flowing activity, I could move around freely in these places. So I wasn't stuck in one table at, off stage. I could really move around freely and photograph everyone. And you get a sort of sense of that, what I'm talking about, with the patrons sitting at the bar and at the table and the saxophonist on the left there. Here's the go dancing on the keyboard. So you guys got almost like kind of like vaudevillian kind of performers, a lot of these guys who have been around for so long. Again, we talk about people not being around. This is Andy McLeod, who passed away a couple of years ago. The other great thing about these bars is that people danced, it wasn't, again, you go to these downtown clubs, the clubs I've been to in LA, the audience just sat, they watched, they plotted in between solos, But here, people got up and danced. And so it really reminded me of like the family parties, that I was around when I was a kid growing up. And it had that same kind of feeling to me. And so I made a conscious effort to photograph things happening off the bandstand and around the club. This is a legendary singer named Leon Thomas. Passed away in the 90s. I also tried to carry over some of the stuff I learned from the Kinship project into this project. And so I started using flash in these clubs and bouncing it, and as well as using a wide angle lens. So I tried to approach it in the same way I approached those family photographs, with the same kind of intimacy and the spontaneity. Sometimes you don't even need a partner, right? This one sort of relates back to the picture in the backyard, right? The same gesture. So dance leads to romance, right? So that's another aspect of what was happening in these clubs I tried to capture, just a give and take between men and women. And then sometimes, couples get mad at each other. So she was none too pleased with her gentleman friend here. Sometimes pictures don't tell, like the look on someone's face isn't truly what was on their mind. This look is truly what was on her mind. This is a place in the Bronx called the Newsroom. I also photographed. So sometimes I would use flash, and other times I would just use the available light if I could, just because I liked the effect of the shadows. Here's something you can't do anymore. Smoke. This is actually the hand of a great poet named Hattie Gossett. But again, just the way she's holding that cigarette, reminiscent of my aunts and uncles who smoked. I think my aunts, everybody smoked when I was younger, so. This is a place, it was called the Casablanca Lounge. So again, talking about how many of these places are gone. Just about every place that I photographed is no longer around now. I mean, I never would have thought that when I was doing these images in the mid-90s, that so many of these places would be gone. And because they had been around for decades, there's no reason to believe they wouldn't have be around that much longer. But the whole real estate boom in Harlem that started in the late 90s and really, I guess, took fire in the mid-2000s, really crowded a lot of these places out. They couldn't afford the rents anymore. So places like the Casablanca Lounge, I mean, it's like, it's next to where the Red Rooster is now. I think it's like a French restaurant. Yeah. You know, okay. Metro Bar is no longer there. St. Nick's Pub is closed. The Porthole is closed. St. Charles, Papa Charles Dinner Theater is closed. So, I mean, Lenox Lounge is about the only one left standing. So there isn't this aspect in photography, again, we talked about not only places not being there, but people not being there as well. So really struck going through this, how much has changed. It's Andy McLeod again. The great Olu Dara, singer and cornet player. The mighty burner, Charles Erlin, on the right there, also no longer with us. And then the decor in a lot of these places as well was something that's really fascinating to me. I mean, these were places that were like lived in, had a very lived in quality. They'd been around for decades, and certainly they had a quality that you could feel about them. So just the decor on the walls, we would try to pick up on a lot of these images. This is like an afternoon jam session, so just in case you think this is a kid up at 2 in the morning in a jazz club, it wasn't like that. This is what the Lenox Lounge used to look like. They've since changed their decor in their back room, but used to have this great Egyptian motif on the wall there. And this is what the inside of the Casablanca Lounge looked like. So I did a book of these photos. I had an exhibit at the Leica Gallery in 2008, and so I self-published a book of these Stormy Monday images. So still available for sale if anybody's interested. Most places had absolutely no problem with me photographing. The Casablanca Lounge is the one place where a guy at the bar came and said, "Oh, you can't take pictures in here." And I said, well, you know, the guy who was performing, this guy named the Captain, had invited me to come photograph, and he said, "I don't care, Captain don't own this club." So, so I just did what a lot of photographers do. We just sort of take them on the sly. So I just took my flash off the camera and did what I needed to do. All right, 2000, I moved to Philadelphia. Decided I needed a little break from New York. But I like being close enough so I can come up here whenever I like, from things like this. So in trying to get the lay of the land in Philadelphia, I came across this little town across the river called Camden, New Jersey. It's right across the Delaware River. Now I went over there because there was a concert being given, an evening concert outdoors. And Camden has a beautiful waterfront. They have the New Jersey State Aquarium is there. They have a minor league ball field. They have a concert venue. There's a marina. And then this outdoor park where they were having this concert. But as soon as you leave that area, it's like complete devastation. I had never seen anything like that on such a small scale. I mean, bigger cities, of course, you can find those extremes between rich and poor, but I never seen it so like on such a small scale. I mean, as soon as you left that waterfront area, you were in some of the most devastated residential neighborhoods you'd ever see. So I was really struck by that and decided first off, I started off trying to catch that dichotomy between this waterfront and the rest of the city. This is a view from the Ben Franklin Bridge as you walk over from Philadelphia. And you see lots of these vacant lots throughout Camden where abandoned houses have been torn down and there's no new development, so they just remain vacant. And then when they haven't been torn down yet, this is what a lot of them look like. So started trying to like research a little bit about Camden and found that it used to be actually a thriving industrial town. It had Campbell's Soup was there, and the New York Shipbuilding Company, and RCA was based out of there. But sometime in the 60s, these industries left. Residents moved out to the surrounding suburbs, and the city was just basically left to rot. And then they've had this succession of corrupt politicians, you know, like one mayor after another for a while just went straight from office right to jail. So, you know, that along with the problems of crime has just created this, it's almost like wasteland. But as I started walking around, I, you know, came across people. Oh, the other thing I will say about this is that I sort of decided to exercise another set of photographic muscles by using a 4x5 camera for most of these images. So I bought this old 4x5-inch Crown graphic camera, and with Polaroid film and a tripod, just started walking around and making a lot of these images. I wanted the Polaroid film because so I could get a sense of what I was doing. This was like a new experience using the 4x5-inch camera. But it also gave me the opportunity, if I came across someone and I was able to photograph them, to give them a print immediately. And then I could keep the negative, the positive negative film. You could keep the negative and then make a print later in the darkroom. I think this is the first gentleman I photographed, a guy named Ed selling jeans out there. But as I walked around and met a lot of the people, you know, that again, there was a much more complex story to Camden than the whole story about the devastation and the crime. You know, you read anything about Camden, you hear about all the bad stuff. But as you walk around and you meet people, you just find this, you know, people just trying to get by, just trying to scrape by, make a life for themselves. And a lot of them and their parents have hung around Camden for, you know, waiting for it to come back, hoping that it'll come back, you know. But working with 4x5 film gives a much different methodology, much more of a slow down ritual kind of aspect to it. So it's just another way of working for me, and give also a little bit more of a collaborative process between me and the sitter, particularly when you're working with Polaroid. A lot of people would approach me to take pictures. They'd see me out photographing. Again, you see this old 4x5-inch camera and a guy on a tripod. You don't see that in Camden usually. So people would often approach me and ask me what I was doing, and I'd strike up a conversation. And then through that, would often end up making a portrait of them. Yeah, a lot of these are already 10 years old. So I've also thought of another project about going back to trying to find some of these folks and rephotographing them. So Jaime mentioned Bahia, Brazil. Go ahead. Okay. I had the opportunity to go there first in 2002 as a resident at the Sacatar Foundation. I've been fascinated with Brazil for a long time. Just the culture, the Afro-Brazilian culture, that in Cuba. I haven't been to Cuba yet, so hopefully I'll get there soon. But just the African-based religions like Candomblé, there's a Brazilian martial arts, capoeira, the music. And so I jumped at the chance when I found out about this place and was able to apply and then got accepted. It's an 8-week residency on an island off the coast of the city of Salvador. Bahia is the northeast area or region of Brazil. And Salvador is the biggest city there. And then this place where I was called Itaparica is an island just off the coast. So Salvador is a big, almost modern city. Itaparica definitely is not. It's a very small town, mainly dirt roads. And I photographed a lot of things in Brazil. So I mean, I sort of like narrowed it down to these portraits because in the interest of time. But I mean, I photographed a capoeira school, lots of different festivities and what have you. But the main thing that I did in 2002 were to take portraits. And so again, I took the sort of like the Polaroid practice that I had developed in Camden, took that to Brazil and started making portraits of people with Polaroid film. This is a smaller Polaroid camera, not the 4x5, so it's like 3 1/4 inch, I think, like 4 1/4 inch. But again, it gives you a positive that you can give to someone as well as a negative that you can take and then go back and make a print from that. So we're talking about a different language, so I had to learn a little bit of Portuguese. Once I'd been, it's an 8-week residency, so once I'd been in the town for 3 or 4 weeks and got to know some people, I felt a little more comfortable about walking around and approaching people for portraits. Now the other thing about the Polaroid film is that once you got 1 or 2 people to agree to be photographed, and other people saw you giving them a print, immediately it was like a magnet. Everybody wanted to be photographed. So I'd leave, the Sakadar Foundation in the morning with, 2 packs of film, thinking that would last me for at least through midday. Within an hour, I'd be out of film. So, but that's, and then I mixed, this is not chronological. So some of these images are when I went back recently in 2011. In between, I got invited back in 2011 to Sakattar. In the meantime, I went in 2007. So this is actually my 3rd time. But this time, no more Polaroid film, right? So I just used a medium format film for these images. The thing of Brazil, it's so much of a familiarity as well as being somewhat strange. You see people that at least for me, remind me of people in my family or people that I knew growing up. But then there's also that slight difference in the cultural aspects and the major difference in language. So just trying to work, can be a challenge sometimes. But overall, I found most of the people very receptive. You notice very few of the men actually wear shirts. This is like the normal dress code. This guy, it had to be 90 degrees out there on this day and he was like this tall, this thin. He looked like he was 70 if he was a day, and he's out there digging his grave. So.
His own grave?
No, I can attest it's not his own grave because I saw him the last time I went. So. And then one of the things I was able to achieve the last time I went, this time, is to find some of the people I photographed in 2002 and rephotograph them. And so this is Isis, 2002 and 2011. Fernando. Igor. I was having the roughest time. I walked around for like 7 weeks. I walked around trying to find these people, and only found a couple. And finally, I came across him, and I had to book the small, like little albums of my previous portraits. And I showed them to him, and he knew everybody. He knew where they all lived. In like 3 days, we found just about everybody. I walked all over these hills all over the town. So yeah, he was. And it's funny is that because, particularly the kids, I never would have known the kids. You know, I passed them. A lot of them were right under my nose, but I just never. Denise, who now has a child of her own. Lunis. Dice. All right, then I'll finish up with just a few images from my most recent work. I mentioned before I'd done street photography, probably since I'd had started photography in LA, and when I got to New York, I took lots of street photographs in Harlem, as well as traveling around the US. And I wanted to kind of get back to that, but I wanted to approach it from a different aspect. So I started thinking about grouping images together, presenting them together. And I also was thinking about how images work sequentially. How like you can look at a contact sheet or a strip of film and think about those images occurring sequentially. All right, the interval between them may be a couple of seconds, it may be minutes, could be days, right? But the idea that one occurs after the other. And I'm also interested in these kind of like random juxtapositions that can occur when you put images together and how they can work with each other. So I wanted to try to group them, but keep them in a sequential manner. So I found a medium format camera that has a vertically oriented frame, and started printing them together. This is the first photographic project in which I've started printing digitally. And this is a digital program, so I have to mention something about digital. I still shoot, I have shot digital images, but I still mainly shoot film. But for this project, the output, I definitely conceived it in terms of printing it digitally because it just made more sense to do that with multiple images and allow me to work on them individually as opposed to printing them in the darkroom. When I went out photographing originally, I started thinking about which image was coming after the previous one. And that rarely worked that successfully. I found it was much better if I just shot whatever interested me. Don't even think about what I shot previously, just shoot the next image and just then evaluate them when I saw the negatives, the strip of negatives of the contact sheet. And so, I didn't plan on these two bookends, these cell phone bookends, but I also thought originally that these would be mainly diptychs, but they seem to work better for me so far as triptychs, 3 images, or I've even gone as long as 4. All right, but and I've traveled. This is in Miami Beach, so There's lots of different places I've taken. There's no particular location that these occur in. All right, well, that's it now. A few things I wanted to mention. Definitely in terms of mentors or people that helped me along the way. I remember when I was in Los Angeles, there's a group of photographers that congregated around a gallery and they really helped me. And then, of course, Kamoinge. I remember I talked about how, or I don't know, I get confused what's in the interview and what I talked about here. But in case I didn't mention this, Kamoinge is a African-American photographers collective that I found out about when I got that Roy DiCaravo book and I read the essay, and they mentioned him being the first director of Kamoinge. And so I made it a point to try to find out more about the collective and some of the photographers. All right, so the work of those photographers was inspirational to me as well. Right here, great Danny Dawson sitting here, Buford Smith, Adric Cowens, and many others, Sean Walker. All right, then that same instructor from UCLA that hit me to that DiCaravo book, she had a catalog from a art exhibit, photography exhibit at Oberlin College. And I found in the work there, the work of Jules Allen, esteemed Mr. Jules Allen sitting back there. And then there was another thing. I used to get something from Friends of Photography, and I found out the work of Marilyn Nance, who I saw walk in. Marilyn. Hey. So, all these different avenues you have, publications, people that can turn you on to work and can help guide you along the way, inspire you to think about what you're doing. All right. That's it, I guess. He asked me if I had gone back to New Orleans since Katrina, and I have. And actually, Kamoinge, the photographers collective that I'm in now, received a grant from the Open Society to go down and photograph the aftermath of Katrina in New Orleans. I think there were 10, is that right, 10? Yeah, 10 people who went down and photographed. And, I'd been going anyway, again, since I have so many relatives. And a lot of course, my relatives were directly affected by it. Most of them had to move, at least temporarily. Several lost their houses completely. So, I had been down there photographing anyway, but then I also went down as part of the Kamoinge grant. And we have a exhibit up now, right? Gordon Park Gallery in the Bronx. It's College of New Rochelle. We have an exhibit of Kamoinge's images of the aftermath of Katrina. In the interest of time, I sort of like to, wean this down to kind of the essential projects that I've undertaken. But I have shot, particularly in Brazil, I've shot a ton of color in Brazil. So hopefully at some point I'll get around to getting that out in the world. And I've actually shot a lot of digital in color. So, but yeah, so I do shoot some color, but it hasn't seen. Huh?
Would you do black and white?
Yeah, oh yeah. Black and white is still my preferred medium. I see other color photographers whose work I really enjoy. For me, there's just something that I feel about black and white photography that I haven't done quite as successfully in color. Yeah, there's been many aborted projects. Yeah. And sometimes it's not even because you don't think the images are working as well. It's just there's something else that you consider more important. That's happened. The thing on Camden, I don't consider that to be fully completed. I want to get back and shoot more. It's just I got misdirected, or directed on some other things, and then that just sort of consumed me. But I definitely would like to get back to Camden and do some more work there. And then there have definitely been other things which, just never really quite got off the ground the way I envisioned originally. Yeah. I find it's usually best if I just come up with a very rough idea of something and then just go out and start making images. And then from there, I'll get a better direction of where I want it to go. If I try to plan it too much, it doesn't quite work. Jazz was so natural just because I've listened to it for so long. And so, I mean, I knew the sound, you know, I knew, like I could tell when someone was coming to a solo, when the climax was coming, you know, I could follow that along. Other music, not quite as much. And just also, you know, with the, I'd have to say that community in Harlem that I was photographing, that was probably the first like community in Harlem I really felt like a part of. You know, I mean, I knew other like photographers and stuff, but that, I've almost like felt like that was my family that I was photographing. And so I don't know if I would have the same kind of, you know, intimacy with some other, you know, community. I don't want to say that the work's not out there, but it doesn't seem to be finding its way into the a lot of the shows I go to or the magazines I pick up. I don't know exactly what is, maybe it's the people who just edit the work are not, you know, that's what they like. And I'll just speak for my, like what I've experienced I've had shooting digital, okay. For one, the way I like to shoot, the quality of camera and digital that I would need is fairly bulky. Like I have a smaller point and shoot I carry around, but that's not really like what I'm comfortable working like really spontaneously with. So its cameras are bigger. And I also found, like I picked up my Leica when I was in Brazil that I hadn't picked up in a while and started shooting with it. It was incredible to me how liberating it felt. It just felt so intuitive, and you work very spontaneously and you think very spontaneously. I know it's with digital, there's this constant, you know. Now you don't have to shoot like that, but everybody does. You know, you can't get rid of that feeling of looking what you just shot. Plus, I think digital, you can correct me on this, Jaime, doesn't have the same latitude as film.
It has a different dynamic.
Yeah, so you have to kind of make sure that you're not blowing out your highlights. And so you kind of like have to look at that feedback to make sure. I just find with film, I'm able to just work in a very more connected way, say with the subject. But again, that's just me. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a lot of digital photographers also know, but again, it's that you can't resist it's that thing you can't resist looking at it. So yeah, I mean, I think if you just operate the digital the same way you do a film camera and just keep shooting without looking, you would maybe, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think all photographers have had that experience of going through some old negatives and discovering a picture that you just completely skipped over the first time, and then all of a sudden you see it years later and you go, why didn't I print that? That's the best thing on this roll. So yeah, that sometimes that distance of time really does help you see something freshly. Yeah, and but again, I don't know if it's just maybe a way of like forcing yourself to work a certain way when you're working digitally, but I know it's very hard to resist that impulse. And again, this is my experience. The photography that I tend to see a lot now, has like this really, I don't want to say almost overwhelming perfection. You know, I mean, digital allows you to do that, to just get this extreme amount of perfection, but I don't quite get that feeling that might be there if someone was working, again, a little more spontaneously and just, you know. Now, having said that, Jaime works digitally and he has some great images that have absolutely every bit of feeling you would get out of film. So it's possible. And so maybe it's just a way for, you know, digital photographers to learn to work that way.